Awesome. So we are now recording. Great. So welcome everybody to Denver Data Storytellers. So Denver Data Storytellers is a community of individuals who are passionate about telling stories effectively with data. We have free events. They're facilitated by community members, and they center around our values of practicality, diversity of perspectives, sharing resources, cultural sensitivity. And so we really just want to connect with this community and provide opportunities to learn about data storytelling. So we're open to all skill levels. We have folks across different sectors and communities and professions. And so we are excited that you all are here today. Our community is entirely volunteer run. So we host events about monthly, depends on the season, depends on what's going on. We do have consistent quarterly happy hours and some of these lunch and learns. So if you want to learn more, you can go to our website, which is denverdatastorytellers.com. And on that website, you can register for our newsletter where we send out all of these events. We also have a Slack channel that you can join and chat with folks. And we are also on Meetup if you want to find us on Meetup, which links to all of those things as well. So several resources there. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I do want to give a shout out. So Paul Collier helps run this. He is kind of the ringleader, I would say, of keeping us all in line. And then a couple other folks on the call, Pat, as well as Drew Lipinski, I think, is on the call. So these are kind of the folks who help us organize events. So thankful to have them all here today. My name is Katie Bridges. I know my name says Catherine. I will respond to either. I work at the City and County of Denver in data analytics in our Public Works, also known as the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Department. And I had the pleasure of going through training through the Denver Peak Academy and got to meet Drew Brown, who is our speaker today. And Drew and I are going to be talking about all things continuous improvement and data. So I know, Drew, you've been with the city quite a few years, but maybe we can kick off here, if you don't mind doing a quick introduction of yourself and your role, and maybe mentioning your favorite part of your job.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. Didn't know this was a group, but love to participate today and hopefully say some things you might be interested in related to continuous improvement. And we'll talk about trust too later as well. But yeah, so I've been with City of Denver for 6.5 years now with Denver Peak Academy. And what we are is we do process improvement for the City of Denver, and our hope and our mission really is to just make things happen faster and make them make more sense, so that the people who actually use those things that we do as a city, that they're like, yes, cool, this actually gives value to me. That's our hope, is reduce those clunky government processes that we all deal with all the time. But how I got into it, so I actually used to work for Douglas County School District here in Colorado, and I was actually hired initially to be a sustainability coordinator, but during the course of my interview, they thought that I was doing process improvement, which I did not know what that was, or that was a thing. And they're like, yeah, you should do process improvement now. So I had to Google it and read a few books, and then over the course of my Googling and researching, found City of Denver and Denver Peak Academy. Ended up taking the black belt training that Katie just talked about, applied for the job, and here we are. So that's how I got here. But my favorite part of the job is really just helping people fix something that has bugged them for years. So something that is just dumb in the process, doesn't make sense. Why are we doing it this way? And then I get to see them fix it and actually change it. And it's just a great feeling for everybody involved, but especially the citizens of Denver. So yeah, that's my favorite part.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Drew. So I know we have a lot of things to talk about here. Maybe we'll kick off by saying, so like you, when I first heard of process improvement or continuous improvement, I also had to Google it. And in my head, when I heard about it, I really thought of data problems and it being very quantitative and there's step 1 and step 2 and you just have to change it and it should be really easy. But going through training, I know you and your team kind of highlighted lots of different kinds of projects. So there are those that are built on relationships and innovations. So can you maybe lay out the different kinds of projects that you all work on, and how broad those can be?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of the traditionally how we've done things, any city employee can come through our training, and we teach them essentially how to think about their job a little differently and measure the things that matter, really. So whether it's something that's really important to them or important to their customer, we teach them how to think about changing how they do their work to better either serve themselves or the customer. So that leads to a lot of ideas, and we use those ideas from people to work with them directly on it. So if they just need help, hey, how do I change this form, or I want to make this make sense so my boss will agree to it, we help with that. And then we also get requests from frontline, mid-management, upper management to work on projects, and those typically involve bigger things than just fixing something on a form here or there. It's more this is an ingrained issue that needs some detailed work and some attention, and those projects can look very different. Standard one would be like, hey, our process is broken and we need a new process, can you help us make one? That would be one. Another one would be nobody knows what anyone does on this team, and we need to figure out who does what and what's their job now. We knew what it was 30 years ago, but we need to know today. So that's a type of project we could do. Another one would be like change management. So if there's some big change coming, could be a new software or a new tool, we will help teams come up with a change management plan to really ensure that those changes are actually taken up and that people can understand what they are.
Yeah,
So those are a few types.
that's awesome. There's so much there. So I know one of your favorite types of projects, and one of the ones you're really great at, are those projects that involved trust and relationships. And so I'd love to get into that a little bit and talk about really at the beginning of a project, right? You have to understand that trust and measure it and see what it looks like. So if you could kind of talk about that and some of the resources you have around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So trust, kind of a nebulous subject. How it came about here in the city is that, well, actually, each of you deal with it on a daily basis as well. Just to work with somebody else, you have to have some degree of trust to be able to work together, whether it's in your professional life or personal life. The people you hang out with typically are people you trust. And if you don't trust them, you should maybe think about not hanging out with them anymore. But anyway, how trust works in my role is that if somebody wants to make a change to a process, but they need to work, oftentimes they have to work with their team or another team to do that. If they don't trust each other, that thing doesn't work. No matter how hard you try to sell the benefit, or maybe you calculate the return on investment and it all adds up, if the people on the team don't trust each other, it's just not going to work. And so we found that just crept up a lot, more than we really realized when we kind of look back at projects that didn't go so well. Oftentimes it was because there was this human element behind it that just was a roadblock, and that roadblock often is a lack of trust. It shows up in a lot of different ways. Just like if you get into a room, one of the tools we use most often is our process mapping tool, and it's where we all get in a room and we use sticky notes and we write a step on a sticky, and then we write the next step on the sticky, and then the next and the next. And usually by the time we get to the second or third step, somebody will speak up and say, nope, that's not how I do it. Wait, what's going on? Why do you do it that way? And they're like, well, I don't want to tell you why I do it that way, because I don't want you to take my job. And so that just will come up a lot, and how to get around it is there's a lot of ways, but we've actually, over the course of the last few years, have developed some tools that really help us get a deeper understanding of what what is the impact of that lack of trust on the process? We have very good resources for identifying where the steps are wrong, and maybe where waste is occurring or where things are taking too much time. But what we don't know nearly enough about is how are the people working together behind it, and where are those things maybe causing issues. And what we've found is 9 times out of 10, if there's a process breakdown, there is often a trust breakdown just behind it. And so just by calling it out, naming it, it has helped us really to have more success in the project work we do, because we not only just look at the logical system that needs to happen, but we look at, okay, who are the players behind it and how they need to, step up to really make the thing happen. And the framework that I use is a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And so same guy who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think one of his cousins wrote the 4 Disciplines of Execution. They like to write, that family. They've got some good thoughts, but around trust specifically, the reason I like it so much is that they boil it down to these 13 very specific behaviors. And that makes it manageable. When you can actually spot a specific behavior, you can start to think of, okay, well, how might that be leading to this process breakdown? Because it's very nebulous just to say, hey, there's trust issues over there. But to actually name them and then find real solutions to improve those trust behaviors, that really is a game changer. And lately, sometimes we'll get requests that are specifically trust related. They say, hey, we've got these 2 managers, they don't speak to each other, and it's causing some strife with their teams and their customers. And so we'll go, look at that. Other times we'll just get a process problem and say, hey, this thing's breaking down. Can you look at it? And then over the course of looking at it, we find, hey, there's this trust thing also. So we've started to just not, we used to it would just come up and we're kind of surprised, but now we just look for it and just handle it. And I will say that coming at it, like, even if it was just a process problem, I usually start with trust, just because when you can get somebody to really talk deeply about, how the inner team dynamics are affecting their work, those process problems come out organically and they'll just talk about it. I don't even have to ask the question. So it kind of helps. Like, I have this tool that just basically breaks down each of those 13 behaviors and walk people through it and see what happens. But anyway, I don't know if I answered your initial question. I'm kind of rambling.
You did. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think it's so important, because it's funny, as I hear you talking about this, I'm the kind of person who's like there's a standard process. Like, why would we not agree on step 2 and 3 and 4? Like, this is, very defined. I feel like, especially in the data world, we want to think that things are very set, that we can just, automate everything. And so one of the things related to trust that was really impactful for me going through the training was learning to identify good projects to start doing improvement on. Because if you ask me kind of what are your pain points in your job, I have a very long list of them. But I think some of the things that you all kind of coached us through are, 1, what things are in your control that you can actually do something about, and then 2, the kind of the impact effort matrix of what are you going to have that's really going to unravel versus what can you get done, what can be a quick win. And so I would love if you could speak a little bit to, I know I just gave a little bit of my experience, but as folks are kind of going through this and learning, what is a good project to do improvement on, how do you help them identify that?
Yeah, so good question. Typically we will say, if possible, if there's a strategic plan, that's really handy to reference, to say, hey, how does the work you do kind of roll up to the strategy of your organization? That can usually lead to some good questions. Typically though, it is the best projects we've found are ones that we know for sure are bugging the end user or the customer, whoever you want to call them, and then yourself as well. So, because if it's painful for you, then that pain is usually going to translate onto your end user or your customer. So we like to find things that, hey, like, what do you get feedback on? If there's a complaint email or a box. Like what do people really tell you about that they don't like? So that's a good place to start. And then also just things that, and this one's a little bit harder to describe, but I think you can get a sense of, like, when you think this process is just, there's too much here, there's too much going on, it's too long, it's too clunky, and I feel like it could just be a lot shorter and more efficient. And just that feeling itself usually leads to some good conversation as well. And some of the things we really watch for, though, are what we call our error rate, and then the total cycle time, or cycle time and total time. So if there's one process that takes 10 minutes and it's cool, like, yeah, sure, that one's great, but maybe there's this other one that takes 3 weeks and is riddled with errors. Those are things that that would help us identify, okay, yeah, there's probably something worth looking at here. And then Katie mentioned this a bit, but when you look at what should you try to fix, we always start with what's in your control, because I mean, it's just a rule for life, really. You can focus a lot on things you can't control, and that's just going to wear you down. But for the limited energy you do have, to put into something you actually have control over. And what that will do is, maybe there's some other big thing that, you would really like to see change, but it's not in your sphere of influence. By working on those other things, maybe it's smaller, but it is within your control, you can show success and kind of build up momentum and help others know, like, oh, wow, they're really into this. Like, yeah, maybe we should go after that thing that sounds crazy. So yeah, so there's a few ways to really identify, what's a good project, but like Katie said, definitely you want it to be in your control. And if at all possible, if it bugs your customer, those are the things that help you look good to your leadership as well. If you're like, hey, I noticed this customer problem, I got this great tool, I'm gonna fix it, here's how much time it's saving them. Like, they kind of perk up to those things.
For sure. Thanks, Drew. So let's say, so you identify a problem. You're like, I have this, it fits all of what you just said. It irritates my customer. It takes a really long time. I'm going to bring this forward and start working on this. And there are several elements to working on it. We'll talk a lot about kind of measuring that improvement and looking at it. But as we think about, we have this problem. I know I am guilty. I had to pull myself out of this several times of, I just want to come up with a solution. I immediately have like 8 ideas of how this is going to get solved. I feel like probably a lot of folks on this call do too. If you're a data person, you're also a problem solver and you're already thinking about what the solution could be. But I learned that's not the best way to start. So if you could maybe talk us through what a better way would be.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, you're not alone. When you want to solve a problem, usually something jumps in your brain. You're like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll do that. Let's do that. And the issue is sometimes it'll work, but sometimes it doesn't. And what part of our, actually, we spent a good day on it in our black belt training, but it's really just dissecting the problem so that you know exactly what's going to make the difference. We humans are very emotional, and sometimes that emotional drive to solve the problem leads to kind of an emotional solution that maybe didn't take into account the other things that weren't quite as obvious out front. So what we do is we really focus on saying, okay, well, sure, there's probably a lot of different things we could do, but let's just name the problem first. Because sometimes what you think the problem is actually some other thing that you haven't thought of yet. And that's actually usually the case. There's something else, especially when it's involves other people than just yourself. That's especially problematic because you know what you know very well, but you have no idea what anybody else says unless you try to get it out in a good way. And that's where the process map comes in. So when we think of like, okay, yep, got this problem, we'll take it and say, cool, well, what's the process behind that problem? Where does it show up? And we'll go through step by step, put it on the wall, get it on the stickies, get everybody's eyes on it. And over the course of that mapping, it really does this thing with your brain where, we often don't think like that in steps, step 1, step 2. You do the thing, but you don't often just think of how does it all look together. And when you do that, and you actually say, okay, wow, here's the 50 steps that we do, and then these ones I could see have the biggest issues, and then that really tells you where to start, because sometimes that awesome solution you thought of won't quite work until you do this other thing first. So that's why so we call it a current state process map. And, to some it might sound tedious or contentious. Sometimes when you get into a room and get everybody's work on a wall, that can lead to some tough conversations. But it is incredibly valuable to get a sense of, yep, this is the actual thing. I can see it very clearly. It takes this much time. And then that's kind of what tells you what to do next. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, yeah. What do you think about that,
Yeah.
Katie?
Yeah, that's perfect. And as part of that as well, I'm going to drop in the chat, because Denver Peak Academy is awesome and puts all of your resources online. As part of any innovation project, you all have this innovation form that has folks walk through this current state. And this is awesome because it starts to quantify the current state in terms of cost and time and all of that. So if you wouldn't mind walking through some of those current state and why they're important to measure.
Yeah, for sure. So where we start, and so we call it, gathering the metrics first. So we'll first look at, what's the problem? What do you think the problem is? So you have you write it down in like a sentence or two, just to, get yourself centered. And then we go through very specific points. So there's 5 of them. The first one we call qualitative. So what do you feel like during this thing? Is it fun? Is it, does it make you sad? What does this process look like in terms of the emotions around it? Second one we would do is the cost. So whether it's like staff time, which is often the case for things in the city, we will figure out what's the hourly rate of the people who do that work. And, are there any other incidental charges or license fees or tools that need to be bought? Anything like that, we'll look at the costs behind it. So just purely costs. Then we'll go into what we call errors. So when you think about what good looks like if the process just went from start to finish and everything happened right and it just went well, the errors are the things that aren't that. So when something breaks down, when something doesn't go right the first time, if there's, a literal error, like something's spitting out a hazard icon or the math doesn't work, what are those errors? Are we really just diligently catalog, what are the things that are going wrong? What doesn't, what causes it to not happen correctly on the first try? So those are the errors. And then we look at what we call the amounts, which are essentially the rate of how often that process happens. So like it could be, for example, in the city, processing a business license. Maybe for short-term rentals, we do, 15 in a day. And out of those short-term rentals, how many need rework or, need a back and forth with the customer? So that can kind of help you get to your errors as well. But it's just to get a sense of how often does this thing happen? Sometimes it's many times over the course of a day. Sometimes it's only once a year or twice a year. So that's really helpful to think about. And then once we know the costs and the amounts and the errors, then we look at, okay, well, how long is it taking? Maybe it's 30 minutes to process a form, but the errors, turns out, cause another 20 minutes. So that just, when we look at the problem from all those different angles, it allows you to create what we call the yearly cost. And so if you look at, here's the people doing it, here's how long it takes, and we do all the math, then that can give, if you multiply it out for the course of a year, especially if it's like a weekly process, you can get a really good sense of how much it costs. And then that helps you go into your future state of, we do the same math of, okay, well, if this problem went away and it looks good, what do those numbers, or what should those numbers look like after we make a change? And then we will actually track the difference between that current state and future state. We get a cost savings, but that is actually, so we just hit 53 million in savings this year, because we've added up for any of the changes that city employees make, they send it to us on the form that Katie was talking about. And so, yeah, we just hit 53 million in savings.
It's
Pretty
amazing.
cool. Yeah.
It's so cool. Cool. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, because I think that that measuring piece and that showing the impact piece is so important. Before we get to that, a little bit of technical process improvement, if you will, which is that you all have many tools that you get to use, and you've talked a little bit about the process mapping. I know this is a short session, and I think we spent days and days on learning all of the tools. So maybe you could choose one or two of your favorite tools and highlight those and how they're used in process improvement.
Yeah. So, outside the process map, which I highly recommend for any problem, is one we call as a communication circle. So it's literally you just draw a circle on the whiteboard, and then you look at any of the people who are involved in that process, and you put them kind of around the circle. And then you kind of go through step by step. It's easier if you've done a process map first, but you start to look at the path of communication between all of the various representatives of that process. And what it does is it shows you who's getting kind of bogged down or where there's miscommunication, which we often find in our city. At least we're very siloed. And so there's a lot of miscommunication that just, would solve the problem if people just talk to each other. But so it can help you spot that really quickly and say, yep, this person's getting jumped over every time, we got to loop them in. Or you can, on the flip side, you could see who's getting like way overloaded. There'll just be tons of lines going to like one person. And then that tells you, okay, we got to spread that work out a little bit or delegate or something. So that's a really good tool. I like it because it's visual. It could tell you something different than just the process map would tell you. And it gives you very clear places to start too.
Drew, could I chime in there real quick?
Yeah.
Because one of the things with the communication circle that I also found really helpful so my team is analytics. We're a pretty technical team. And so oftentimes our actual communication is pretty limited. But the other great thing is with the communication circle, you can put systems on the outside of that circle as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what we were seeing was that, we'd run a query and like we'd save it out somewhere. And so because that wasn't going where it needed to be, this other person was having to go to that system and pull it to another system. And so this communication circle was not only a communication between people, it was also a communication between systems and showing where there was delay in communicating the data. And so I thought that was really helpful for us.
Oh yeah. No, that's great for things like that. And we often encourage, these days, you're hard to find a process that's only manual now. So there's always going to be some tool or application in the mix. But yeah, to be able to spot those things in that way is really handy. The other one I really like, so it's called a roles or responsibilities matrix. And what this tool does is it allows you to see, especially if you're new to a team, you have the question, okay, who does what? And they're like, well, you'll have to just go talk to them because I don't really know, actually. That's usually the answer we get. And so roles or responsibilities matrix is kind of like the process map, but it adds this layer of who's all doing it step by step. So instead of just saying, step 1, step 2, step 3, it'll show you that, but also who is the person or the role behind it, and what's the thing that they actually do. And that tool, it is incredibly powerful, especially these days. And during and after the the pandemic, we had, as I'm sure all of you experienced, lots of turnover. And so when somebody would come in to a new job and try to figure out what they're supposed to be doing, it's very hard because nobody knew or nobody had it documented. So we found ourselves doing a lot of this roles or responsibilities matrix to really show people, yeah, here's actually who does it and here's where it is in the process. And that in itself leads to tons of improvements, because when you get everybody in a room and you all finally get on the same page on who's doing what, then that is, it can very clearly lay out some things you need to do different usually. So that one's huge. I would highly recommend it, especially if you've got that maybe on your team, you're confused about who does what, or if it's just on a specific process, like I just need to know where I fit into this thing. It's a really good exercise to go through.
Yeah, those are both great. And I believe on the site that was put in the chat, the Denver Peak Academy, I believe the content for Black Belt and maybe even Green Belt has examples of both of those in it.
Yep, both in there.
Cool. So yeah, if you want to peek at some of the training Drew is talking about, is on that page that's linked in the chat.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we have an innovation project. We do all of our homework. We process map it out. We use these tools. We have an idea we're going to try. We've brainstormed. So we are testing a few things out. How do we know whether they're working? What does that look like?
That's a great question. Our preferred method would actually be able to see it on a dashboard somewhere. So if it's like license, we'll just go back to the licenses. Maybe it's, we did a process improvement and now we're expecting to be able to process like 10 more licenses in a day, let's say. So how we would measure if that's working is ideally we'd be able to point to a database somewhere and just spit out a number and say, yep, look, there it is, it went up. So that's our preferred. We very rarely get our preferred. So that is when we rely on communication with the people who are doing it to just get a gut check and say, hey, like keep a sticky note at your desk and just kind of track them throughout the day for me and see, and once we get to the end of the week, let's see what happened. So it can sometimes just be as simple as that. The other way too is to collect the customer feedback. So especially if it's a change that really is, this thing is supposed to be helping out our end user or our customer, let's find a way to hear back from them to see if it actually is working. And that's something I would say we don't traditionally do super well. We're trying to do more of it. And it is super important because that's why we're here at the end of the day as public servants anyway. We're serving the public. So that's a great one. Like I said, if you have a customer on the end of that innovation, to like just ask them like, hey, is this working better for you? But the same thing, like I said, can be done with internal staff. So if you don't have a nice, pretty dashboard that's telling you exactly how things are going, that's really just kind of setting up check-ins to say, hey, what did your numbers look like this week? Or, did you notice something that wasn't what you thought it would be? And that can happen sometimes too, is we make one change, thought it was going to be great, and then turns out it created some other problem that we have to solve. And that's important to know. So I think that's why those, a good cadence of check-ins after the change are really important, just to get ahead of some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. And so the last piece I really want to talk about here is the outcomes and making sure we kind of measure and tell about those outcomes, because oftentimes I know you're lucky in that your entire role gets to be process improvement, but for many of us, we kind of get stuck in what we're doing, and so many times I've heard we don't have time to process improve, which is very funny because the whole idea is that you would save time and have more time later. But I think a whole big piece of that is showing the impact that process improvement can have. And I know when we talked to you, you had a lot to say about the storytelling part of this. And so would love for you to share why that's important and how we can champion that in our work.
Yeah, no, so storytelling is huge. Honestly, we only know that we've saved the 53 million because we've very much built a process around that, because our program is not a thing you have to do. We're an optional thing. You don't have to go improve your process. That's just something we provide and we're here for. But the only reason why we keep getting people to come to our stuff is because we talk about it. And we say, yeah, there's this person over here that did the exact same thing you were trying to do. Like, you should go talk to them. So telling that story first just helps with your credibility, because you can show, here's this awesome change I made, and now you actually know about it, because maybe nobody would have known unless you kind of built a story behind it. But that, the power of having that story to at least reference can really help connect people. And that's in these days, like I said, our city is so siloed. And if we just had more connection to people knowing like, hey, this, literally the exact same process from our police department to our, public health department, maybe, and how they process a contract. Well, it turns out they don't do it the same way at all, but they could, and maybe they could learn something if they talk to each other about it. So that storytelling of just, what happened, how much time did it save, what did it do on the other end? What did it lead to? Because oftentimes that's not the last thing. When you solve one problem, you find another one and you keep going. And that's why we call it continuous improvement. But you don't know about it unless somebody tells a story. And so that's just huge. We've developed, like I said, we have a pretty solid process for it. We track a lot of things. We track who does what. We give them credit for it. So that we have a database that says anybody who's turned in an innovation to us, we know what they did, we know how much it saved, and we know who their boss is. Like, we can give people credit. And then also we share this with other cities. So we've had people come through our black belt from every major city, actually, and then some in Canada. And we've still got a pretty healthy network of people across the country who come to our training to really learn and spread that to their own cities. Like Chattanooga, Tennessee, for example, they have their own peak program. We've got one in Montgomery County in Virginia. I think San Francisco has set up their own peak program. And that's really, just due to that storytelling. We wouldn't have been able to share that with anyone if we weren't intentional behind it. So that all to say that, it may seem like it's extra work to do that, or to even do process improvement at all. Yeah, it is some extra work, but we don't often get the time to put our brains to a problem like that and create. Because the cool thing is that you're hired and you're in your job because you're good at what you do, and that's really where the power is with the people who are doing the work. Because we can make guesses and say, hey, I think you should do this, but if you just tell us, because you're the person who does it, you know what's best, you do it, and then you tell me. So I think that's like, what we find a lot is that people just don't give themselves enough credit. Like, it's often like, it's just all wrong and I can't do it, but you can, and there's a way, and your way is better, so do it. And so I think, yeah, that's where I think just it might sound a little conceited to shout about it, but really it helps you and it helps others too, because sometimes somebody just needs to be motivated to like actually do something that they've been wanting to do, but they've been holding back for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's such a good point, and I'll share. So I had someone on my team go through black belt training. Again, very technical. The project they did was automating something using a Python script, which was awesome. And so the way they'd always talked about it was like, oh, I'm writing this Python script, and it wasn't really gaining traction. They were just like, oh, look at this cool Python script, and people who knew Python were like, yeah, that's cool. But no one really understood what they were doing, and going through black belt, had to meet with our fleet team, who was gathering all of the data, and went out to the fleet shop and understood how the data was collected in the trucks, and the pain point of the check-ins of people getting the trucks, and process mapping all of it out. And through that process, by the end, it was no longer I'm writing a Python script. It was, oh, we are helping our folks that are servicing our trucks. And when you go out and say it that way, it's so much more impactful. And you're still doing the same work, but I think what people hear and the impact you have is bigger just by the way that you're telling the story. And so I so appreciated that perspective of them being able to explain it that way. So
yeah, for sure. No, it's huge. And oftentimes too, like, that storytelling can be the decision maker for if that change goes or not, because usually you have to get your boss on board or other teammates. And if you don't tell that story right, they're not going to hear it right. So that's why we provide lots of ways to do it. We've got a very rigorous data way to show the story. And then we also have, a compelling emotional call to change as well. Like, people are not getting benefits, they're going hungry, like, we should do this faster. That kind of story can help convince somebody, when it's just like, hey, I found a way to save 5 minutes. That's not as exciting.
Yeah. Cool. Well, before we open it up to questions, because I'm sure lots of folks have things they would like to ask you. Is there anything else you would like to share?
Yeah. I would just say, like, really, not to beat this with a dead, the trust thing is huge. And I would say, like, if you're curious about it and you notice, like, yeah, there's maybe some trust breakdowns on the team, put some energy into it, because you'll find that investment in that relationship building is it's going to help you, but it's also going to help everybody else in the long run, and especially your customer if you can. So I would just say, those things are, sometimes you just don't want to think about it, and it's like, that's their problem, I'm not going to do anything about it. I would just say, think about what it would take to build that relationship to a better state, and how could that help you in your career in the long run. So I just encourage you, check out Speed of Trust book, if you get time. There's some business stories in there that probably could have been skipped, but for the most part, that book is, it'll speak to you, because you'll see those trust behaviors that maybe you aren't practicing so well. So yeah, that's my pitch for that. Just think about
Drew,
trust.
what is the cartoon that you all show in Black Belt with the
Oh, with Lou.
blue? Yeah,
Yes, this is Disney short. It's
I'll
about
post it in the chat. It's a good example. I love it.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, this little guy, he's a bully, and basically finds out that the bully was bullied in his youth, and, like, that's why he was being mean. And then this little girl gives him a hug, and then he starts to, like, be nice to all the kids. Anyway, it's a nice story.
It's I mean, it's way more applicable than I thought it would be.
Yeah, totally.
I think about it a lot. I'm like, Lou, oh, right, I'm just
Oh yeah,
upset. That's why I'm not
yeah.
approaching
Well,
this problem well.
yeah. We'll just give you, the point behind it is that you never know what somebody's life was like before you met them, and you make
Yeah.
assumptions a lot. And so when somebody's being kind of weird, it's usually there's something way down there that you don't know about. So our whole point, and what we kind of hammer down in Black Belt, is that, especially when you're trying to make a change, if you don't know that person very well, like, don't do it yet. Like, you got to get to know them, because that relationship is ultimately what's going to make the thing happen. So yeah, that's all to say. If somebody's being weird or being kind of off-putting or mean or whatever, and they're involved in your work, like, that's the time to, like, get closer, and kind of just talk, ask them about their life.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Drew, this is so helpful. I love this. I love how it can be applied to all sorts of projects. From, I work on data projects, but I know people work on all sorts of projects, and this is really invaluable information. So the last few minutes here, we will open it up to questions. So if you feel comfortable, you can come off mute and ask a question. If you'd prefer to drop a question in the chat for Drew, you can do that.
I've got a question. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you both for hosting this. This is super interesting. I do not work for the city, so as far as I know, I don't get to go through what sounds like a really great training. So I was wondering if you could recommend any resources. You said when you were starting out, you were reading a bunch of books on process improvement. If you could recommend some of those, or other trainings, that sort of thing, that would be super useful.
Yeah, good question. So the first book I read actually was called The Toyota Way, and I'm drawing a blank on who the author was, but essentially it goes through the history of where the kind of the modern framework of process improvement comes from, which is from Toyota, and how they did things after World War II when they were really struggling. They'd made some very integral changes around how they approach their work and approach what their customers want. So I would say, just to, like, get a very healthy sense of what is process improvement in general, that's a great place to start. And I'll have to think of some other specific books. Honestly, that's the first one I read, and then that's what led me to call Denver Peak Academy to figure more out. But yeah, I'll think of some more books. We actually do have and I can post this, or maybe I'd send it to Katie later. We have a recommended reading list, just places where we got a lot of content we teach a lot of the tools that we teach were not we didn't make them up. We saw what others were doing and we gave them credit for it, and we teach it ourselves. So yeah, but yeah, I'd start with Toyota Way. And then also I've noticed that outside of the Speed of Trust book, which is really helpful just in general, we've been doing more strategic planning type projects lately. And we use the framework from the 4 disciplines of execution, which is also one of the Covey cousins is in there. Very simple method, but I think that's why it works so well, because it's very straightforward. There's not a whole lot of jargon. It's just a very repeatable, quick method that helps you like laser in on strategy pretty quickly. So I'd say that's also one that we've really been using a lot lately.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Drew, I'm making a list here. I'll compile all of these resources and send them to everyone on the call in our Denver Data Storytellers group. So don't worry, we will make sure we share all of this after the call.
Cool. Yeah.
All right, who else has a question?
I could ask one. So one of the things I noticed, like for me, process improvement, somewhat addictive is not the right word, but like when I find like I save time somewhere, like I feel like it gets me thinking other ways of like, oh, now I want to save time here, and it just like kind of opens up that like creativity of like finding other ways. But unfortunately, I find like a lot of people on my team like just don't always think that way. And just trying to give people that extra push. I guess, what advice would you have to kind of get people who are not kind of thinking about process improvement or process automation, like naturally kind of get them an extra push to kind of think that way? Because I do think once you start, it's kind of hard to stop. And it makes your life a whole lot easier. And like what Katie said earlier, it's like once you automate something, it saves you time, and then it's gives you time to do other things that you actually enjoy doing.
Yeah. So I think that's it. Like everyone's going to have a different motivation for doing it. It does take time, and energy, and not everybody sees how that, time can be saved in the long run. So I think it's more of like getting very granular with it and seeing what specifically like tailoring it to the individual themselves. So thinking about their work they do and what, something you've noticed they gripe about, or something that is important to them. Like if they're really big on quality, and they get stressed about when things aren't high quality, like that could be a way to get in there. Or if you always like, they're always going home late and they're always talking about how much they work or whatever, like that could be a space to say, hey, like, what are some things that are taking too long for you? Or, so I think just knowing those specifics about what bugs that person can help. And then also kind of chunking it down, because I think people kind of hype up process improvement a little bit, where they think it's like all these crazy things that take tons of time, and it's this brilliant idea that no one's ever had. And it's not. It's actually very simple things, just very, very small things even. So I think just showing like what's like a really small, simple thing that could have a bigger impact than they realize maybe. And that's what we call those things, like just do it, things that you don't need your boss's approval, or, a new line item in the budget. You just need your brain in a couple hours, like those kinds of things. So yeah, that's where I would start, is just knowing what kind of makes them tick, or what makes them not tick. And then, yeah, things that are like quick, but like maybe effective. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Don't see any in the chat.
Hey, Drew, I've got one. So, I'm a small business essentially, and I wonder if there are other folks on a call who, it's like working in an established organization, but it's kind of a startup environment. I guess I wonder, like, how do you coach folks on when to think of something as a process? Because it's not really the process the very first time it's done, but there's going to be a point where once you realize, oh, this is going to go again and again, maybe we should try and optimize it. I don't know if you've got any sort of words or advice on that, especially for folks on the call who are working for sort of an earlier stage org.
Good question. Yeah. And, I would think, like, from a longevity perspective, it's say, like, let's assume this thing is going to work and you're going to be around doing it for a while. That means usually, you're going to get some expansion and you might need some help. And when you need that help, if you can't, describe it super well, like, here's how the thing works, then I mean, we've all been in those jobs where it's like, hey, you're here now, and, like, go do your job. They're like, well, you have, like, some instructions, or so think about that, of, like, if you were not there, like, let's say you call in Rich and you're gone, next day, who's gonna be able to do what you did, and how would they find out? So that's one way to think about it. Is like, if you want to feel better about taking vacation time when you need it, be more confident that your work can continue without you there. That's not going to speak to everyone, but I think just thinking about, like, kind of a good reason to get something down on paper or to establish a process would be, to make that repeatable. So somebody else theoretically someday could do that thing too. So yeah, I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, 100%. It's like a good encouragement. If you say we're pretty small, we're early stage, but, like, there are some things you do more than once, and it's probably good for somebody else to know what that is. So write it down, and then you know what your processes are, and then you can think, which one of these do we really try and improve?
Exactly. And just in the process of writing it down, you're going to realize which things maybe need the most work or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Good questions. And I will say, unfortunately, we strictly serve, like, nonprofits and other local municipalities. So I will say, if you're hoping to take the training, you're going to need to go get a government job or nonprofit. But that being said, we do put a lot of our stuff online. So if you're curious about the tools we use, we even put all the PowerPoints up there too. So if you just want to kind of click through the things we teach, you could do that. We also have a YouTube page where we've created videos about some of the projects we've worked on. But I will say, if you are interested in process improvement, it can really, if you can demonstrate that ability, that you're going to be able to use that everywhere in your career. So if you're just looking to get better at that or know more about it, honestly, I haven't looked much at we typically, we teach the stuff, so I don't often think about who else teaches it, but I would say give it a good look. And, if you don't find what you're looking for, you can always email me or reach out and I could help you, try to get connected somewhere. But I will say that, this skill, even if you're not doing it yourself, but helping others do it, like, very, very valuable. And that's is gonna help you a lot over your career.
Awesome. Drew, thank you so much for your time. This has been really valuable, and I think a lot of folks on the call will probably be looking at the peak resources, and hopefully more folks can watch the recording and apply this to their everyday work. I know I have found it tremendously useful. I was a skeptic. I will fully admit. I was like, who needs all of these tools? And now, I have pages and pages of my notebooks with communication circles on them. So
that's great.
Good stuff. It's really great. So really appreciate your time. Thank you everyone who is able to hop on and join for this Lunch and Learn. Again, we'll be sharing these resources, and you can check everything out on denverdatastorytellers.com. We'll get you to somewhere where you can find the recording and sign up for our mailing list. So with that, I will wrap up for today. And again, thank you all so much for your time.
Cool. Thanks for having me on. Great to meet y'all.
Thanks so much, Drew. Awesome job, y'all. Thanks again, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, y'all.
See ya.